Welcome to the Fear Room channel. Enjoy your viewing. I love you. This story happened to me twice. I don't pretend to be unique, which I'll warn you right away. Part 1. Student. In the 2000s, I studied at the only higher educational institution in our small provincial town, and as a poor person, I could not afford a separate living space, which means he lived in a dormitory, the only 9-story building in the entire city, 4 blocks of 8 rooms per floor. Annual turnover. Wow, how many interesting stories the students themselves told about him. My neighbor and I lived in the same room, either regularly hung out somewhere in the evenings, either with friends or just on the streets with friends. I was left alone more often, since everyone had a key. There was no need to wait for a neighbor, and I went to bed completely alone, without worrying that I would have to jump out of bed in the middle of the night to let him in. It was the same that evening. I had dinner, watched TV, swapped notebooks with notes, and went to bed. I woke up unexpectedly. I never woke up at night for no reason. And in general, I sleep in such a way that even an atomic explosion cannot wake you up, but here you are. A midnight vigil. Someone was walking along the corridor towards our room. The first thought that it was a neighbor was dismissed immediately. The steps were heavy and rattling, and my neighbor was short and of average build. The sounds of footsteps approached the door. Well, he definitely won't come into the room. He doesn't have the keys, I thought. And then the door began to open. There was no sound of the lock being opened, but the door opened. That's a fact. The horror that someone unknown, clearly of considerable height and build, playfully entered the room made me literally press into the bed. The footsteps came again. He was approaching my bed. There was nowhere to run. There is no use in shouting. Everyone has been asleep for a long time. Pray? Yes, all the thoughts I had ever heard simply flew out of my head. All that was left was an all-encompassing feeling of horror. He stood next to me. I heard his heavy breathing. The body was paralyzed. Should I pull the veil off my head to at least see who came for my soul, and then not allowing me to finish my thought? Strange hands grabbed me by the neck and began to choke me. No, not to choke, but to press into the bed with superhuman force. In complete silence, only his heavy breathing and the creaking of the sagging bed frame could be heard. Help was beating in my head. Help, but not even a wheeze escaped his lips. And then the phrase, "I love you," flashed on the edge of consciousness. What? Is this a joke? The delirium of a dying consciousness? There was nothing left to breathe. My lungs were on fire. The weight of the pressing hands was unbearable. "I love you." I tried to pronounce it, but my lips treacherously did not move. Repeated again and again, but to no avail. My head was empty except for one thought. From somewhere the understanding came. This was exactly the phrase after which everything would stop. He gathered all his strength, all his despair, all the horror of what he had experienced, and desperately wheezed, "I love." Heaviness breathing, the feeling of someone else's presence nearby. The body began to come to life. He jumped out of bed and rushed to the light switch. Turning on the light, I saw a locked door and a peacefully sleeping neighbor. The rest of the night, almost 4 hours, I sat, trembling slightly, in the corner of the room with a knife in one hand and a box of matches in the other. The neighbor who woke up in the morning was very surprised to see such a picture, but was satisfied with the story of the terrible dream. Nothing like this ever happened to me again in this room, and the next year I moved to another block, further away from this place. Part 2. Everyday life. After the incident described above, no otherworldly nonsense happened to me, and I, without hesitation, wrote it off as a trick of my imagination and an unsuccessful dinner after graduating from university. Not eager to devote a year of my life to serving the motherland, proud defenders of the fatherland, forgive me. I got a job in a rural school. On occasion, I even received the living space reserved for a young specialist. The house, by the way, was built on the site of an old church and cemetery, destroyed under Soviet rule. Plus, in my half, some guy hanged himself. However, I was never able to find out the details of this very fascinating story. Well, he hanged himself and hanged himself. The locals answered. Just think, what an event. But I learned about all the interesting aspects of my home much later than the events described below. So I, a young man who had never smelled gunpowder and, due to unsociability, was a lonely person was given a huge living space at my disposal. Having transported some simple belongings, he settled down in the maximum possible comfort and began to live and teach people. And then everything happened again. Another ordinary evening, everything as always. I sat at the computer for a while, read a book, and performed the necessary evening procedures. The sun had not yet disappeared behind the horizon, and I was already plunged into the arms of Morpheus. I woke up in the middle of the night from a creaking sound. It would seem that the house is old. Creaks are not uncommon in it. I'm already used to it. So what's the deal? Here it is, the creak repeated. That's how floorboards creak when you step on them. I remembered these were steps. Those same steps are heavy, damn them. History repeated itself, and again I could not do anything. The body was again paralyzed with fear. This time I was not wearing a blanket, and through my eyelids I could see something large and dark approaching my bed. I recognized his heavy breathing even in a crowded hall. And again the hands, and again the heaviness on the neck and the inability to breathe. Do you think this is fun? It's scary. It's incredibly scary. To understand that you have no control over your body, and this creature is trying to kill you again, and quite successfully, it's worth noting. But this creature did not take into account one thing. I remembered how last time, choking and dying, I remembered one phrase. I love you. I had no desire to die in the prime of my life, and this creature clearly had no intention of stopping its attempts to take my life. Out of anger at him and myself, my head became clearer. And lo and behold, I managed to move. Somehow taking a breath of air, I whispered a saving phrase, and again everything stopped. I didn't have the strength to get up and do anything, and I just passed out. 5 or 6 years passed. Nothing unusual happened to me anymore, but I don't want to move anywhere anymore, and I never stay overnight. Friends sometimes get offended, but I feel safer at home. The second time, whatever or whoever this creature is, it will not appear in this house. I am absolutely sure of this. The only thing that worries me is that very phrase, I love you. Why her? On the brink of life and death, it was this phrase that every time before going to bed, I repeat it like a mantra. And I know that everything will be fine. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will be glad to see you again.